We are 6 women.
We are wordsmiths.
We are magic.
We are curious.
We are contradictions.
We are wanderers.
We are people of many names.
We are mind trekkers and story weavers.
We are adventurous spirits.
We continue to grow.
We've been baptized in the font of dream and memory.
We are partly truth and partly fiction.
I am Gail.
I am Joanne.
I am Margie.
I am Katie.
I am Marion.
I am Mary.
We are the Mystic Order of East Alabama Fiction Writers. Welcome to the Mystic Order podcast. The Mystic Studio is being renovated today, so if you hear sounds of saws, hammers, etc., that's the new studio in progress. And today, we have 4 mystics and 1 guest, and we're going to let the mystics introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce the guest.
Very well. I'm Mystic Mary.
I'm Mystic Margie.
I am Mystic Joanne.
And I'm the Queen. And who are we missing?
Oh, we're missing dear, dear Katie and dear, dear, dear Marion.
I know, and I do actually miss them. Well, our guest today is Dean Bonner, and we've invited him today because he is also a fiction writer, and our subject today is fiction. A little bit about Dean. He's a retired Coast Guard intelligence officer. I have no idea what that means. And a Morse telegrapher. He now hails from a quaint Alabama town where he lives with artist PJ. Dean has many talents and interests, and among them is playing the banjo. However, we did not invite Dean to play the banjo. We just invited him for his writing skills. We also invited him because he's our big fan and a supporter of the Mystic Order, so welcome, Dean.
Welcome, Dean. Welcome, Dean. Guys, we barely got through that introduction because Mystic Joanne is over there tapping and tapping away like she's doing Morse code and giggling about it like she's 7 years old. So, hi, Dean.
At least 12.
I'm having to edit the podcast, so I'll be erasing that off. We're going to start with Dean and ask him, did he have a mystic week or any part of some mystic week?
I did. I was all ready to get a colonoscopy. And
oh, God. I forgot to say that we don't mention medical procedures on the podcast.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dean. Please tell us.
After I had completed half of the preparation for this, they called and said my referral didn't go through and that I would have to do it another time.
That is not mystical,
no,
dude. That's tragic.
That is awful.
That is a true tragedy.
We usually save our mystical moments not for the hilarious, but for the meaningful. If you had completed it now, maybe. But, okay. Margie, we're to you.
My mystical week. Okay, well, some of this Gail is going to talk about it because we went to the same presentation.
Well, so then I'll move on to Joanne.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay. There was an artist in town from Florence, Italy, sponsored by Rhonda Collier, who is the global international coordinator at Tuskegee Institute, who Gail and I both know and is a wonderful, incredible person. Anyway, she brought in Justin Thompson, who's an artist, performance artist and filmmaker, and we both went to presentations by him. I went to one at the Tuskegee Airmen's Museum at the airfield, and their grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, so some of the things are based on that. And then his brother Jason and Bradley Treadaway were also in town.
That's about where you could stop.
Okay, I'll stop there because Gail is going to... I'd like to talk about their performances. I think Gail saw different ones in Auburn, but we can compare that. But I'll turn it over to either
The reason
Gail
I stopped
Joanne.
Mystic Margie right in her tracks is the brother came along with the artist, and the brother's name is Jason Thompson, and he is not a famous artist from Florence, Italy, but he is a really cute jazz musician.
He's a jazz saxophonist.
Yes, and you should see his saxophone.
He played it on Sunday.
I know, I missed that.
And,
but he said
and Justin sang.
Oh, Justin sang?
He has a fabulous voice.
Oh, I am so sad. But I had something else to do on Sunday. I saw you on Sunday. Anyway, Justin's a very special person and very close to me. So
you mean Jason?
Oh, yeah, both of them. Jason.
One of the brothers.
Oh, and we went to this fabulous party the next day, and I've never seen such a spread in my life of food. It was
Wonderful.
Amazing in Opelika, and that was with Elizabeth Vaughn in Opelika. And talk her into doing all your parties if you need one.
Yeah, talk about those, whatever they call them, boards, the cheese trays. Charcuterie board. It was a whole table. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we are to Joanne's Mystic Week.
Yes, my Mystic Week is, it is spring. Spring came, I guess, 3 days ago, but we still we're in the South, and we've still had some cold snaps, and we were worried this year that it would get our blueberries and our peaches and our pears, but they have survived, and I have buku strawberries, and the blueberry bushes are just loaded, and we probably will have peaches, and I know we'll have pears for the first time in 7 years.
Nice.
So that was
If the
my
deer
Mystic.
don't eat them.
They would have to be very tall deer. Maybe if the giraffes don't eat them.
Why is it in 7 years? Do they go in cycles?
They have just never produced for whatever reason. And we had the extension lady come out, and she must have whispered them or something.
They need a boy and a girl pear tree.
No, this one does not.
They need a partridge in that pear tree.
Maybe that's the partridge, yes, but not.
I look forward to the fruits.
Yes, we'll be.
Of your labor.
We'll have your babies out to blueberry pick.
Yeah.
Well, what about you, Miss Mary?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I went to New York City to visit my daughter Anna, and it's really fun to see your kids thriving in cities. Mystical part was the Elizabeth Street Garden, which is a small community garden in the neighborhood called Nolito, which stands for North of Little Italy. Nolita, I guess. Anyway, it's this tiny garden, community garden, tucked in between a block, so there's big buildings on both sides, or buildings anyway.
Does it have enough sunshine to be a garden?
It does have enough sunshine, and it has statuary. It has beautiful statuary. There's a big harpy eagle that sort of greets you as you come in. There's angels. There's some absolutely precious lions, dogs, and a Medusa. And it's an old garden, so it's got some crumblies. And we were there in the winter. I mean, I was there it was winter, so I could see all the things beginning to bud. It was very exciting. But part of what makes it mystical, other than it's just such a surprising little piece of loveliness in the middle of the city, is Patty Smith is the person who I learned about it from. And, Anna says Patty Smith is a taste maker. So there's a word for you.
Did she call you on the phone?
Mm-hmm. She called me on the phone, but I missed her call. So I saw a video of her walking through the Elizabeth Street Garden. I think that's what she was calling to tell me about. But it was fun to kind of traipse around in her footsteps. Of course, the city has tried to take it over and this and that, and there's a nonprofit now to try to protect it, and you can find all that out on the internet. The women that were there, I bought a T-shirt to support the garden, and they were like, oh, yeah, Patty Smith is here all the time. And I was like, man, it would be so much fun to run into Patty Smith at this beautiful, enchanting little garden, which is bursting with flowers in the spring and summer. So y'all can look that up, Elizabeth Street Garden in New York City.
I know this was your
Very
magic
mystical.
week, but my favorite pictures I got from you and your lovely daughter were the ones in where she's tiny and you're a giant.
Yeah, the Museum of Illusions.
Yes.
We just stumbled upon that, and it was well worth the few hours we spent in the Museum of Illusions.
That's why I'm going to New York for those two places.
Yeah, there's the flyer, Gail.
Oh, very cool. Okay, well, these were pretty mystical weeks, and our guest certainly had one. And because I was going to skip this part, but because we're talking about fiction, I want to ask each person what they're reading this week. We'll start with Joanne.
What I am reading is Sleeping on Jupiter. And it is a book. I couldn't tell you the authoress right now. I know it's a lady author. It's about the life of a Syrian refugee.
Did you say authoress?
I think it is an authoress.
That's an old-fashioned word there.
I know it
Is this fiction?
Yes, it is fiction.
It's historical fiction.
I don't know. I mean, who we'll talk about what makes fiction. And
Okay, let's
what
do.
is fiction
All
and
right.
what is not.
All right, Margie, what are you reading?
Well, I'm reading This Is Happiness. Well, actually, I've read it, but I wanted to listen to it on Audible. It's absolutely gorgeous.
That is one of my 5 favorites.
I know. It's
beloved, I mean.
yes,
Not favorite books, beloved books.
Beloveds by Noel
Williams.
Williams, yes. And it's beautifully read, too. And so I'm just listening to it sometimes when I'm walking, sometimes when I paint, just because I can really get like the Irish accents and everything about this whole village, so-called Fa.
I use that book as an example when I'm talking to, if anybody wants to hear me talk about fiction, if I'm talking to anybody about fiction, because it takes a very small happening in a very small village and writes the most beautiful book of fiction.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Clarence, what you reading?
Right now I'm reading Somebody Told Me. It's Rick Bragg. I've been on a big
nice.
kick of his work. We're about the same age, from similar types of towns and that type of thing. And I was also reading the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor.
Wow.
Now, Somebody Told Me is a lot of his stuff about war-torn places or places in strife, including New Orleans, for the crime, for the hurricanes and all the things. To take a break from that, I went back and started reading some of My Southern Journey. And because Flannery O'Connor, she doesn't have any happy endings.
No, and she's definitely Southern.
Oh, yeah. It's great stuff, but I can only do like 3 or 4 of those.
Before you get sad.
That's just such an interesting juxtaposition, Rick Bragg and Flannery O'Connor, to bounce off each other.
Well, Somebody Told Me is the same way. If he's talking about D.C., New Orleans, or some of the other foreign countries he went to, he went down to Haiti about the same time I was in and out of there on a ship. And it's a heart-rending thing to do. That we carried some of the refugees back and dropped them off at the pier. And he was in country on the ground at the same time doing stuff for newspapers. And that's what led to his Pulitzers, his newspaper work.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Well, he's a great writer. Okay, Miss Mary, you up.
I'm listening to Demon Copperhead. I'm almost finished. And I'm reading Ann Patchett's new book of essays called These Precious Days. That's not fiction. Demon Copperhead, of course, is fiction, and that's Barbara Kingsolver, and I'm probably the last person on the planet to finish it.
No, I haven't read it.
It's
Okay.
modeled after David Copperfield.
Right, which I've never read.
Are you still reading Proust?
Well, I've read the first 2, and then I took a break, and I'm going to go back to the 3rd
Okay.
when I feel like it.
Well, one of my very favorite fiction writers is Michael Ondaatje. I'm going to spell that for the audience. Ondaatie. He's originally from Sri Lanka, and that's why he's got a weird name. I'm reading his newest book, Divisadero, and I'm not very far into it. I just picked it up from the library yesterday, but he is already surprising me with his beautiful words and turn of the phrases.
All right.
Okay, well, next we are going to talk about our 3 most beloved fiction books.
I thought it was 5.
Well, yes, I have 5.
She had 8. We made her.
I narrowed it down to 5. And Margie's already mentioned one. This is Happiness. All right, I'm with you, Mary. What are your 3 beloved fiction books?
I did 5.
Okay, go for it.
I did more, but I scratched them off. Okay, the first one I brought to show all the mystics, the name of the book is Martin Martin. And the first word Martin is the name Martin, and the second is the animal Martin, which is in the Mustelidae family, like a little weasel. And this is by Brian Doyle. And he's one of my favorite authors in the world. And his first book, Mink River, was my gateway book into Brian Doyle. And now that Martin Martin is my favorite, I feel like I'm having an affair on Mink River. Like, it feels weird for Mink River not to be my favorite book anymore. But
Not favorite, beloved.
yeah. But I brought it as a visual to show the mystics that I'd mark them up. If you've never read any Brian Doyle, you can just go online and read his essays, but he has the most lyrically beautiful sentences. And fiction is I like nonfiction more than fiction, actually, but his books read in a way like nonfiction because you learn so much about the natural world. In this case, a fun little animal. All right, I won't be so long with the others. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which I keep by my bed and just pick it up and read it whenever I feel like it. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Betty Smith, which I learned began as a nonfiction. It began as memoir, and slowly morphed into fiction, and that may be why I love it so much.
You know,
It's so
that happens
intimate.
to me. When I'm writing, I'll be headed one way, and the
Yeah.
next thing I know, the little elf in the computer
Yeah.
takes me another.
Yeah, I can't outline. I write to process. What else did I have on here? I have Love and Ghost Letters by Chantal Acevedo, who was in Alabama for a while, in Auburn, and that's a Cuban romance, set during a war-torn time, which we know about. And I just added O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker, which
we
Mystic
all read.
Marion gave us for Christmas, and I read the first sentence and put it down. Walked away, picked it up, read the first sentence again, put it down, texted Mary and said, "Thank you, I've loved this book so much."
I told her it was my favorite Christmas present.
It is so gorgeous. It's a coming-of-age story and set in a Scottish moors, and it's got a castle and a strange girl. It's sad, it's dark, it's beautiful, it's lyrical. I just can't recommend it enough. O Caledonia.
And it's also darkly humorous.
Yes, it is darkly humorous and just really good.
And it's, I think, one of the books that all the mystics have read, but I wondered how Marion got through it. And I asked her that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there are some, Marion will not read books where animals are killed. And there were
Right.
several gory details.
Yeah, how
about
did she
that
get
there.
through it?
She said she just held her breath and cried.
It was
Yeah.
Marion. It was our Marion. Okay, well, we are to our guest, Dean. Dean, did you bring us 5? And
Did we not do our favorite books?
I just did my favorite book.
Going
Oh,
to Dean
oh,
now.
Dean. Okay.
Would you like to go
Do you want me to-
before Dean?
I'd rather
Margie?
Dean go.
Margie's going to beat you to it, Dean.
I'm sorry, Dean.
Do you want me to read from mine, Margie?
Yes.
Okay, no, we're going to our guest. Mary said we don't want to call it favorite. We want to call it something else. So and I forgot why she doesn't want to call it
Because favorite is paralyzing. I can't even tell you my favorite color because then I feel like.
But you
what
would
if
tell
I'm-
us your favorite book.
Well,
Beloved.
It changes.
Okay. All right. Your 5 most beloved book.
I can't come up with 5. I can come up with 2.
That's perfect.
And one is The Kestrel Waters. It's Randy Thornhorn, who actually came to one of the Mystic book events, and I got a signed copy from him before he passed on. And that is just the most amazing Southern Gothic book. It would make a wonderful movie.
Is it Castric?
Kestrel. As
Oh,
in the bird.
Kestrel.
Kestrel Waters.
Like the bird.
Like the bird,
Kestrel.
yeah.
Oh.
And what was the author again?
Randy Thornhorn. And it's a fairly thick book, but it covers everything that I think Flannery O'Connor would, and then some more tactile things that are put in there. It reminds me a little bit about John Huston did the Flannery O'Connor full-length novel, Wise Blood.
Which is so good. The book, the
And-
movie is really good.
I came this close to being an extra in there. They came around to Mercer when they were filming that down in Macon and Milledgeville, but some of my classmates were extras in it. And I read the book like 40 years later, and I love that book, and I love the movie. It's a lot like that in a way, but I think it actually adds more to it and is not as, as biting as O'Connor would be. And the other one is the Keith Ramsbottom series is Scott Pixello. He's living in Germany. He's from Britain. And he is writing about 66 AD, the time of Boudica, more or less. It is a fiction, and this young man, he's like 12, 13 years old, and he's fighting the Romans.
I see.
You know, I think I have that book, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, it's great. And,
I'll have to read it.
It is so full of puns and wordplay and stuff to keep an adult entertained, but also it's good for middle schoolers, teenagers, and that kind of stuff. So
Perfect.
in my case, it fits me just fine
Yeah.
because I can never write young adult being neither.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of adult. You're reading some adult things. Okay, now Margie, who's so anxious to talk about her 5 most beloved books.
I'm not that anxious, but okay. So I'm thinking about overtime, and so first of all, one book that everything is based on, so many books, was Homer's Odyssey, and that's got so many plot twists. And I do a lot of my work based on some of that mythology too. I loved, especially in college, the Tolkien's Lord of the Ring trilogy. And I thought that was, to me, that was one of the first books that really captured my imagination. That was, besides when I was young reading comic books. But I also loved Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove series because I think it really took you into the Old West, which is sometimes so idealized in some ways, and this took you to the old, you don't really want to be there. It was brutal, but it was really great and great characters. Also, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his books, which Joanne does too. Shout out to Michael Ondanje, or however you pronounce it, everything he wrote. And of course, I can't leave out all of Margaret Atwood's books, who I dear. I know.
That's more than 5.
Well, I didn't say the books. I just said the author.
Yeah, you are so cheating, Margie.
Yeah,
by doing
cheating.
the authors and not the book.
Okay,
Right.
sorry.
But that's okay. I want to
Not
hear all
only
these
did
things.
she want to hop in front of our guests, now she wants to cheat.
I'm a cheetah.
She's a player.
She's a player. That's
Cheetah.
right. I couldn't pick all of my beloved books like the rest of you. I think we read so much, and books are like good friends. Sometimes you pass them on and then you forget about them.
Oh, absolutely.
So I did mine. I did mine by age, and my favorite book from childhood, I think Mary did that too, was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, and I could read that book even this day over and over again.
Can I just quickly interrupt to say that was on my favorite childhood list, and I read it again in college, and then the last time I read it, guess what? I didn't like it.
That's happened many times to me.
I know.
That's happened many times to me.
Well, our
weird.
taste, it's kind of like peanut butter. Our tastes grow.
Yeah.
And the two that I would say that, well, I'll just say, I've read 2 books in English and in Spanish, and that was because of college.
You've only read 2 books? That's very sad.
In Spanish, how many books have you read in Spanish,
That
Gail?
would be 17, I think, at
see.
last count.
Well, mine were Love in the Time of Cholera, Amor en el Tiempo de Cólera, by, again, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And it was interesting because I read it when I was in college, and it was good. But then I read it right after COVID, and I went,
Oh, fun.
oh my gosh.
Oh, Love in the Time of Cholera. Why didn't I do that?
Yeah.
Well, didn't we do a podcast called Love in the Time of COVID?
I think we did.
Exactly. And then the most recent ones that I could think of, and I thought, well, if I could think of them, then they must be beloved, and was A Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia, which was a wonderful, kind of a mystical kind of book. And then, of course, Oh, Caledonia. Marion has just hooked us with that thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all wonderful.
And it's her only novel, so we can't read more.
I know.
The author.
Elbeth Barker, and she is wonderful.
All right. Well, we're to me. I want to mention a couple of things. I brought my long, most beloved book list, which is 3 pages.
Back in
Anyone
front.
that would like a copy of this will have to go on our Facebook page, the Mystic Order of East Alabama Fiction Writers Facebook page, and request it, and then I will mail you a copy of the Queen's reading list. But I brought it because I was originally I said we could have 3 books of our most faves or beloved books, and then when I tried to narrow it down, I narrowed it down to 8. So I immediately wrote the Mystics and said it's 3 to 5 books. But now that I didn't know we were going to add a children's book, I'm going to say my favorite children's book is Red Rider Came Calling by Burkett Breathed, the person that did the cartoons.
And she's given a copy of that to my grandbabies.
Aw.
It's hysterical.
It's a wonderful book. My favorite line in that book is, he paused to organize his fit.
Nice.
But my 5 top faves are The Master Butcher's Singing Club by Erdrich. And all of her books are fabulous, like The Last Report of Miracles at Little No Horse. But I can't count that.
Did she write the sentence that knew it?
I think she might have, yeah.
Okay.
Then this is a book no one's read but me, and it's called Things My Girlfriend and I Have Argued About. And it's one of the funniest books I've ever read. It's by Mill Millington. And then, of course, we'd all be amiss not to mention Amor Towles. And I quite like his book, The Rules of Civility, although most people read The Gentleman from Moscow.
And I like The Gentleman from Moscow better myself.
But I love The Rules of Civility. And then, of course, I'm shouting out to Peter Heller, and I hope he's listening to me, because the last time he shouted back to Margie. And Margie wouldn't even know who Peter Heller was if it wasn't for the Queen. What do you have to say for yourself, Margie?
Well, you did recommend Dog Stars to me, I have to say, which I loved. But then I got Peter's attention.
That's just sad.
Wait, hang on. He's calling me now.
If you're out there, Peter Heller, please respond to the Mystic Queen and not the Mystic Underlings, please. And my favorite book by him is The River, and I absolutely I love all of his. He writes other books like on fly fishing and I don't know, daring sports, but his fiction books are my favorite.
I think he has a new one out because I was in that well-read bookstore the other day.
Really?
Yeah, and Margaret Atwood has a new one out too. Old Babes in the Woods.
I want to know what Peter Heller's new book is.
That would be us, Old Babes in the Woods.
And then I can't believe Margie stole.
That's Margaret.
What? I wasn't paying any attention.
Margaret Atwood's new collection of short stories is called Old Babes in the Woods.
Joanne said that would be us.
That would be Joanne. Joanne's the one living in the woods. Okay.
I beg your pardon. You can barely see my house.
I used to be cougar bait.
Oh dear.
Oh, now, Jane, anyone that would mention their colonoscopy on our podcast is no longer cougar bait.
No,
as of last week. Probably
I
up until
disagree. A lot of people
up until last week.
I disagree. People are fascinated by bodily functions. That doesn't bother me at all. Somebody's half colonoscopy is especially right up my alley.
Especially because
What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm telling you, this is off limits. It's beneath the mystics to go on with this.
Gail.
Okay, my last favorite. And Margie stole it is This Is Happiness
Y'all are just like little children. She did
by
my
William. By Williams. And that was recommended to our book club by one of our favorite writers on earth, and that would be Rita Grimsley Johnson. So if you want the mystic list from the Queen, you're going to have to respond to us on our Facebook page.
I might steal
Can I
that
interrupt?
list.
I'm giving this one to Mary because she's going to list all it, and then
I'm not going to list all of it.
No, you're going to list our 5. I've marked the 5.
I noticed that I only said 4. I'm going to tell another.
No, oh no, you're not.
Yes, I am. Real quick, and I'm going to be like Margie. I'm going to total cheat. Because I'm going to say 2 really fast, like water for chocolate and wait a minute, and water for elephants. They both have water in them, so I'm counting it as 1.
Isn't that funny? Because and now that I'm going back and everything that you guys have mentioned, most of it, which I've read and I loved. So
they're your beloved books too.
they're my beloved books also.
It's not the word favorite. It's the
ultimate.
Ultimate, yeah.
Yes,
It's like
and it should
some
not be.
beloved books. Some books I love. Some of my
favorites
I
are
can do.
up to change.
That's right.
For instance, my men.
Right,
I've got a new one now.
Who's the boyfriend of the day, Gail?
Jason Thompson, the jazz player.
Oh,
And he's got
she has a long
Oh,
list.
yeah, he's a saxophone player, and his saxophone belonged to his grandfather, and it's a huge saxophone. I've never seen one like it. And I have a friend in Sweden that's a jazz musician. He immediately wrote me and wanted to know all about it, and I don't know a thing about it. I missed the concert, but I certainly.
Talk to Kari.
Dean, are you aware that Gail's so boy crazy that she once stalked a whiff and poof?
I don't know what a whip and poof is, but I expect a trail of broken heart.
Is that a kind of bird?
My whiff and poof that I was stalking, is now famous, and he's starring in.
Joanne,
We're gonna make you edit this podcast if you don't hush. Don't give her the microphone.
She's whiffing poofing over there.
I'm sorry, audience. This has gone astray of everything we meant to do.
I have another question.
No.
Why did you call him Clarence earlier?
Did I call him Clarence?
Yeah, what's up with that? Why do you have a double life, Dean, Clarence, Bonner?
Well, it takes 2 to keep out of trouble.
I know, and his mother,
At least.
when he's in trouble, is it Dean Clarence or Clarence Dean?
Clarence Dean.
See, if you get in trouble, we're calling you Clarence Dean the rest of the podcast.
That's probably what your daddy called you when you got in trouble.
All right, we are moving on to a topic, which is fiction. And the first thing I want to get your thoughts on, and especially when you yourself are writing fiction, is it really fiction or does your life creep into it? And who's got an answer?
How could it not? I mean, I couldn't write effectively about Eskimo Inuits because I don't live that life. Or I could not write effectively about the Aborigines in Australia, although I've read about them, you would not know. So I think yes, your experiences, or what your experiences could have been, play into fiction very much.
So, Joanne, you write fiction. So, like, think about some of the fiction pieces that you've written. Like
Does she
the
ever?
novel that Gail's going to finish if you don't, about the girl in Florida. How is that?
I've been doing really. I'm caught up now with that.
Okay.
She's already entered the house in my fiction.
Yeah. Well, some of that, of course, is fiction that was changed to protect the innocent. The names were retained to protect the innocent. But through my career, I have known people who have been those predicaments, and I have, and I know what it's like. I know personally what it's like to be isolated. Mm-hmm. So, and that's how that story starts out. She gets thrown out of the car by her boyfriend. So, and then it develops from there. So that's, those we can experience those things, even though maybe that has not happened to me. I can imagine what you would feel like. So.
Well, I think we ought to take note that Joanne has not been arrested. She's a lawyer. She's hearing these secondhand.
You want to tell the truth?
No, we're doing fiction today.
None of the mystics have been arrested. None.
Well, something
very fictitious.
About fiction, I mean, one thing that Geraldine Brooks, who wrote The Horse and Children of the Book and a lot of she said she really likes to start with a historical thing because she doesn't have to make up so much. Uh-huh. And she likes the research to do that.
Yeah, historical fiction's like cheating. Because
I think our guest wants to talk, and we won't let him. What is your thought on this, Dean?
I am too lazy and incapable of writing something like Dune, where you invent every grain of sand, every relationship, every character from scratch.
And make your own map.
Or Tolkien. I couldn't do it, wouldn't want to do it. And so I don't write much fiction anyway. It's a lot of creative nonfiction, which is a lot of fact-based nonfiction humor for the most part. And even in my poetry, which I don't write much of.
Well, if it's not fiction, if it's not nonfiction, it is fiction. Not your poetry.
No, it would come closer to nonfiction, but it's written in a style of fiction. So I'd say it's largely more non-fictional than fictional, except for one story I wrote recently, and then that one was completely pulled out of the air.
But even J.R.R. Tolkien, even though he wrote, about a made-up place, he was in the war, those are stories he wrote to his father, and the idea of good and evil was all around him and how it played out with the war. And then, he just made it in another place. I'm watching The Man in the High Castle now, and that starts off with a historic premise. This is, World War II. Well, guess what? The Germans won instead of the Americans, and now that they're occupied.
My question is about the author putting themselves, and you're answering that, putting themselves into it. How often? And I had an unhappy situation where I wrote a maybe not so fiction story about an old love, and someone from my hometown calls me up and goes, "I know who that is," and she was right, but of course I lied. I said, "No, this is totally fiction, something made up, totally out of my imaginary elves." Then I hung up the phone and I thought, oh, Lord, I'm going to have to start covering up the facts a little better.
Yeah, that's terrifying with fiction. I know you guys have probably all read Stephen King's On Writing, which is one of the best craft writing books I've ever read in my entire life. And because I've read it, I'm best friends now with Stephen King. But he addresses that, like how much of you is in your fiction writing. And pretty much the general understanding is you're never writing pure fiction. But he's writing psychopath killers. And he's not a psychopath killer, but he talked about how you can still tap into universal feelings and themes about people. Even his psychopath killers have some humanity. And he gave an exercise for you to look at an inanimate object and find the human struggle in it. And that morning I saw a pink helium balloon across the street from a trailer park on Wild Road, and it had become entangled in some briars. And I went home and wrote about the struggle of this balloon, this pretty pink balloon, to escape its trappings and being caught in the briars. And suddenly I was like, this is what Stephen King was talking about, that we have all these experiences that you can bring them to things that you have no firsthand knowledge of, like Joanne like I said, I know what it's like to be isolated. And that we all know what it's like to be isolated and abandoned, even if we haven't been kicked out of a moving vehicle by a drug-addicted boyfriend.
Are you writing that?
I am.
Oh,
That's her story.
I am too, Joanne.
That's
How strange.
Joanne's story.
How strange.
Not the same boyfriend.
Yeah, it's the same story. Joanne won't finish it, so I decided to write it. Well, Dean, do you find yourself in your stories?
A lot of times, a lot of them are directly pulled from things I witnessed myself or I got good secondhand account for. So there's a lot of me in there, but not always. But as I said, I don't write a lot of nonfiction. I mean, I don't write a lot of fiction, but I wrote mostly nonfiction anyway. But yeah, there's a lot of me in there. Well,
I noticed she wrote a screenplay. Now that's not nonfiction, is it?
It absolutely is. No, it's absolutely nonfiction based.
Oh, is it?
We sent that out to Austin Film Festival. It did pretty well. But no, it's based on my first book, my nonfiction humor book, and some of the tragic stories.
What's the name of that book?
I talk slower than I think.
Yeah.
But there are some underlying tragic undertones in that book, especially the unsaid part of the struggle of being that poor and dysfunctional and so forth, and the humor on the surface being how do we cope and how do we mask all that stuff. So it was a different take on it, a different slant, and a different layer of depth to it.
Now, what's the name of your town in your screenplay?
Walnut Grove. It's actually used the real name of it.
Yeah.
And
And
the name
it's
of the
called
screenplay.
Tarnation.
Tarnation.
Tarnation, and that
Which
is
is
the name of the TV series.
Such a good name.
Oh,
Sure.
Can you
cool.
tell all the mystics have read it? What? We're just
Tarnation.
pulling it out. Come on, Dave, tell us about it.
Just as a little clearing up of what we're doing today, Mystic Mary, our tech person, is going to be putting our most beloved books on our podcast, on our webpage. Our Facebook page. Sorry, our Facebook page. So all you people who are out there writing furiously trying to remember all these books, Mystic Mary's going to take care of that for you. Just go to our Facebook page when you see that this will be out, and we are season 5, episode 4. So just a little clearing up there. Now I want to ask you guys what makes good fiction. What makes good fiction? And who's got an answer? Fiction writing.
Well, what makes good fiction writing is a compelling character, I think. I think you can talk about somebody walking down the street if you have a compelling character, and to write that, again, you go back to experience and what they're thinking, what they're doing, what they look like, what they smell like, how they sound when they talk. I mean, you use all your senses to bring into life your character. And that you can write about, like I said, a character eating soup. But if the character is compelling, if people can identify with the character, you've got good fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I like things that are character driven, that are really developed. I mean, some things that are plot driven I also enjoy. Mm-hmm. Those are always fun to read. Also, you have to care about the characters. Sometimes I'll read a book and I don't like anyone in it. Do I really want to read what happens to these people?
What page do you stop on?
Well, you've recommended 75 now.
Yeah.
And because life is short. So I go with that. I'll give it 75 pages.
It used to be 100.
Yeah, I know.
And now that we're of an age.
We've gotten older.
75 is plenty. I may lower it to 50 next year.
I'm 50. I mean, I'm 58 in my age, but yeah, I only go 50 pages.
Yeah.
Life is real short. I've been busy all my life.
I was going to say, if I pick up a book, I feel obligated to read it to the bitter end.
Oh my! That's the lawyer in you.
I guess it is.
All right, Clarence Dean, what makes a good fiction writer?
I will occasionally bail on a book if it's that bad or just out of touch with me. I think it's a balance between what you said of building good characters and the details to build it, but also leave a little enough wiggle room for the reader to put themselves in that situation. So I try to balance it when I write, have enough detail to see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, but not so much that it handed over too much that other people can't see themselves as that character or in that situation. So it's a weird little balance. But
oh, that's interesting.
What about you, Miss Mary?
I was thinking about it, and I think characters as well. I was going through my Goodreads list, and I read a lot and listen to a lot of books just for sheer entertainment. These crazy things are happening, Girl on a Train and The Wife Between Us. And I'm scrolling through them, and it's like I don't even remember the plots of those books. I just liked them. They were fun, and then I just move on. But the ones that I love, it's usually a character that I learn something from, or I halfway relate to it and halfway learn from it. And like, I've read those huge Jonathan Franzen books, the corrections. They're huge. They're like a billion pages long. Enjoyed every bit of it, but didn't make the 5-star. Only went to the 4-star because I didn't care deeply about the characters. Like, I found it fascinating.
I just got corrections out of one of the little libraries. So I'll put it back now because I've got to go with 5 stars.
Yeah, I mean, I read more than one of his books, which is a pretty serious commitment. But it's more about the staying power for me. Like, if I'm still thinking about the novel, a fiction book that I read years later, then that's something. The ones anyway, it's characters mostly.
Well, when I think about what makes good fiction, character, plot, setting, theme, point of view, conflict, and tone. But what makes fiction beautiful for me is all those things, especially words. Beautiful words. You choose the right words for the right occasion, and you do this in a creative way. Be precision with your language. Don't pick words that are just big to be there, but they're the exact word for that moment and that sentence. And then if you talk about words, you have to talk about what I always talk about, the turn of the phrase. And so this morning I looked up, what does the turn of the phrase mean? And the answer was an expression which is worded in a distinctive way, especially one which is particularly memorable or artful. And I am going to read you something from the back of Ondaatje's new book, and it's one of the, was it the Boston Globe? Let's see who said this. Anyway, Ondaatje possesses awesome narrative gifts, prose as beautiful and clear as rainwater, a composer's artistry in the uncanny unfolding of his stories, a flair for suspense, and not the least, characters who shake us like death in a family. So I thought that was a real good expression of what makes beautiful words. Of course, I always talk about the narrative arc and the plot, and I think that's important. And that's what I think makes good fiction.
Well, I agree with you about beautiful words, because so many books like O Caledonia was written in the most gorgeous way. And the phrases she used are not things that we think every day. You know, I think I find that a lot about British writers. They really have a better command of the English language than sometimes we do. But a phrase from Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient, some description I remember vividly was of the sapper who was the Indian bomb diffuser, is in St. Francis Chapel in Arezzo, looking at the Piera della Francesca frescoes and describing those. And as an artist, I've always loved those frescoes. And he was really up close because he was inspecting on the scaffolding. And it was just beautifully, I'll always remember that, that passage. So anyway.
You're such an artist.
Herman Melville's Sermon to the Whale. I could just wake up in the middle of the night and remember the drunken sermon to the whale. Like, it's forever. That was not exactly related, but that's where my brain
Well,
went.
who's got some more thoughts on what makes good fiction?
I will tell you, I read about a gentleman by the name of, we'll figure out what his name was, but Herman Gernan Carrillo.
Say what now?
Gernan Carrillo, and he was a teacher at George Washington University. He taught fiction and writing. One of the things that he did, and you talk about a turn of a phrase, was first day of class, he would pull up the Norton anthology and then slam it down so hard on the desk, and everybody think, okay, this is going to be our book. And he'd say, this is trash. Now, put an orange on the table, write the orange. And much like you said, you can say, okay, it's orange, it's round. But what is the orange? The taste, the texture, the feel. And so
The
he would
struggle of the orange.
the struggle.
Why
of
did
the
he say the
orange.
Norton anthology was trash?
Well, that was his.
Just trying to get you mad?
Just trying to get
Or when you were
everybody's-
eating an orange as a child in the hot summer
Right.
days.
Exactly.
The promise of an orange.
And the juice that got all over your Peter Pan collar.
Exactly.
That's right.
And that's what he was trying to get people to do, was to do that as opposed to read somebody else's writing and say, oh, that's nice, that kind of thing. But then what had happened was, so he was this renowned, beloved teacher at George Washington, and he died. He died of COVID complications. And the New York Times came in and wrote this wonderful piece about his life, how he was a refugee from Cuba, how he did all these wonderful things, ran away with his TA after graduate school to someplace, and then she decided she was gay and married a woman and left him there, and had all these stories. Well, after they published that, his family said, that's not true.
I love it. Did he make it up?
Wow.
He had made up, he had written
love
his
it.
own story. His actual name was Herman Glenn Campbell. He was from Detroit.
I love it.
He was from Detroit and grew up in basically, suburb America.
Hey, write your story. They
But
say.
he had written his
Some
own
of that happened in
novel.
my family. But I won't go into that now.
Emma Danzak made up all the clubs she was president of for the high school yearbook. They published them all. And
Oh my God, she cannot be in Congress with the rest of those people.
there she
Well,
goes.
maybe she can be.
Maybe that's her qualification right there.
She can't be in one of the committees though. If she's done this, they're going to let her be a Republican, but toss her out of the committees.
we're not going there.
Okay, we won't.
Enough.
Well, that's true. Well, let's go to Mr. Bonner and see if he has any more thoughts about how to be a good fiction writer.
You can try to catch the tone, the audible tone. And I always admired Poe on how, in his poetry, he would select the words so carefully to get the tone and sound of the feeling of a word. And I have attempted to do that as where and when I could, when it was appropriate. I'm sure there's a technical term for that, but I don't know what it is.
That's one of my stories from our family, that the Georgia poet Chivers wrote the poem Nevermore and was stolen by Poe. And some of our family papers have people discussing it back and forth, whether it really happened. So there's some fiction or historical fiction.
There you go. And Dean, when you write, and especially when you write fiction, but I know you write mostly nonfiction, what's your process? We all know each other's because we're together all the time, but what's your process?
My process, pretty much on any of it really, is I start with a pun or a phrase or an idea of a situation, not a character or anything like that, and it takes a tangent. It takes a tangent to go from there. And it'll kind of write itself as I'm walking around, I'm working in the yard, I'm building something, I'm doing something.
And you're thinking about it.
Not even consciously most of the time. It's in the background.
See, something
Writing
will
yourself.
happen to me, and I think, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write about it.
Well, those things will resurface during the day, and it's like, use this phrase, kick this phrase out, keep this scene in, kick that scene out, add this character. Only a few things will rise to the surface. Most of it's written in the background. And at the end of the day or the end of the week, a few days, I'll sit down and type it up. That's it.
I'm
Not much
very
editing.
jealous of your process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because if I don't get to it right then, I forget it. Well, on that note, can you read a little brief bit of what you brought today of your fiction before we go to the mystic moments? What's it
I'd love
called?
to. It's called Open Your Heart, and it begins, I'd like to teach the world to sing, Caroline complained to her grandmother. The old woman stopped stirring the pot for a moment. No one sings now. No reason to. Go on and tend the sheep. Sweet Caroline, the nervous sheep in the teen's charge answered before she could. Ba, ba, ba. Then Caroline saw why the sheep were skittish. Two intruders in sheepskins were advancing on all fours toward the sheep and the huts beyond. Wolves sprang from the tree line, taking the humans as easier prey. The white fleece turned deep crimson. The wolves left with what meat they could carry. The grandmother, who had called her, caught up to Caroline. She looked down at the tangled mess. Humph, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. Come home with me. Surely we'll stand guard. Caroline ducked under the flap of the hide that served as the front door of the hut. She stirred the thin metal pot that an ancestor had hammered. Where's the beef? She asked grandmother. The last of it is gone. Your brother knows a guy who can trade knives for some. He went to Jared. Grandmother placed a hand on each of Caroline's shoulders, looking her dead in the eyes, into her soul. I have something for you, Caroline, something ancient. You have come of age. She pulled a chain from a leather pouch, careful not to tangle it. She lifted it over Caroline's head. Looking down, Caroline saw a heart that shone like the full moon. It's beautiful, Grandmother. When she fingered it, the heart opened. The insides were dull and black, obscuring some symbols she couldn't decipher, even if the tarnish didn't obscure them. What does it mean, Grandmother? We don't know. It's from a long time ago. A head poked into the gloom. The chief summons Caroline. The bit of blinding light from the flap had gone before her eyes adjusted to see who it was. Caroline stood before a thin, middle-aged man sitting on a metal throne. The elder said that the throne had been pried from a flightless bird, one left by Yusef, a throne that had cost 500 sheep when it was new. It looked uncomfortable. The chief looked at Caroline in the eye. He sized her up. A strong girl, just become of age, but not yet a warrior. He shat upon the ground through the wing of a throne that indeed bore the name USAF.
All right. Very, very different.
Oh, and I'm so okay. So my brain doesn't know where to put that in time. But you started with a modern song.
Yes, it's a dystopian comedy.
Yeah, and you also threw in a couple of funny modern things like stirring the soup, stirring the pot,
yeah.
and where's the beef? So that was pretty fun. I enjoyed those clever twists and turns of time and literal interpretations of those silly sayings.
Some of these things will
Awesome.
survive many generations from now.
And maybe they came from many generations prior.
Not where's the beef.
Yes.
I remember that commercial
I
on
was going to
TV.
say, but we do remember that crazy commercial, and that's why
Yeah.
anybody would realize that when they read it. It's interesting.
Well, we have come to the part of our podcast called Mystic Moments, and I'll start with the Queen. That would be me. And my mystic moment, I had about 3 months ago, the same mystic moment. And I, once again, this Sunday went to hear Jan Mulder, who is Dutch-born. I've probably not said his name right. The first name is Jan, but I think they called him Jan. Anyway, he makes Liberace look like a slouch on the piano. And I didn't realize that there was going to be an orchestra again. The first time I heard him 3 months ago, there was an orchestra, and the music wasn't all Methodist hymns. It was a lot of things I recognized. And it was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever been to. The orchestra, Mary's daughter was in that orchestra. Did you know that?
I did not. I can't even keep up with the child.
But she played the viola in the first one. And again, he had a smaller orchestra and played only hymns, which, of course, the mystics will know that the Gael doesn't know a lot of hymns, but I knew a few of them. And it was just a beautiful experience. If he comes back and y'all can get there, go.
Okay.
The Methodists invite him, I don't know often or not, but
He looks a little like Dylan.
Bob Dylan. That's what I was thinking. I was
he
like, he looks
does.
a lot like Bob Dylan there. A lot like him.
yeah,
Let's
not
see.
so much in person.
Jan Mulder in the festival. Okay.
And the orchestra was just marvelous, too.
Yeah, Bob Dylan crossed with, like you said, Liberace.
Yeah. He's amazing on the piano.
Well, my mystic moment was also musical and involved Emma Dansack, my daughter. She and her bandmates, the Galway Ramblers, and that's spelled with a G-A-U-L because it's French and Irish music. They rehearsed at our house, and it was the music that they're playing is loud and full of buzzing and
Do we know
reverberation.
any of the other members of the band?
Well, I doubt it. Fred lives in France, and he was here last year, and he's here right now for lots of performances. Nathan, CJ, Scott, you may know Scott Miller, but I don't have any connections with these people outside of the band. But they were rehearsing, and Joe and I both found ourselves drawn to go down and sit right beside them. The instruments include a hurdy-gurdy, which is medieval stringed instrument, and also Emma's viola. We had a guitar, a banjo, and
We need a picture of the hurdy-gurdy on our Facebook page.
we had pipe. We had uilleann pipes, which are the Irish version of the very small-looking bagpipe type thing, and flute. And the feeling of sitting so close was so enchanting. And then I noticed that the dogs had all nestled in as well. And like Bernie was sitting underneath the legs of the guy when he was playing the banjo, and he was just gazing at the hurdy-gurdy. And I thought the dogs can feel it too. Like it feels good. And Clarence, you've been to some of the sessions, I guess, and have probably sat in with them in Opelika.
Yeah, I've been to a few of those. I want to come to the next one. So on Tuesday, I'm going to try to make that one.
Yeah. Well, by the time the podcast comes out, it'll be far gone, but they're doing a concert tomorrow night at Soundwall. So those of us here. But they also came to do something with my after school yesterday, and the kids just stomped their feet. And finally we said, you can get up and dance. And they just went wild. And they were so interested in the hurdy-gurdy. So I will
That's a wonderful activity
share.
for after school.
Oh, it was so much fun. It was just Emma and Fred,
Mary
the
is a
hurdy-gurdy and
stunning
viola.
after-school director. She
Stunning.
gets kudos for everything she thinks up. I saw her in Michael's buying St. Patrick Day things.
Shamrocks
And coins and stuff for her after school. All right, Mr. Clarence Dean Bonner, what have you got for us for your mystic moment?
My mystic moment actually ties to the very beginning of that story. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Tomorrow night, I get to go listen to the guy who wrote that.
Oh, who did
Coca-Cola
write?
song.
Who did write it?
I was trying to remember his name now. I forget. I had to look it up. But he's doing a house concert nearby at an undisclosed location. But if you pry it out on off the air, I'll give it to you.
Okay, well, we'll do that, won't we?
He wrote that back in 70.
Oh, yeah.
And, the Hilltop Singers covered it, and then the Coca-Cola company used it as well. Just a weird coincidence that I get to go hear him and another musician, songwriter play.
Yeah.
Friend of Philip Strauss.
Yeah. I forgot that was the title of your story. And also, it was the amazing end to the Mad Men series. Sorry if I'm spoiling it for anyone, but if you haven't already seen it, then you probably just should have. Don Draper out there with the mystics in the hill, and all of a sudden dreaming of I'd like to teach the world.
Were we
brilliant
in the hill with Don Draper, the Mystics?
We were the old babes in the no, those were young babes. I'm sorry to say.
All right, Margie, we are to you.
That'll be fun, Dean.
Okay, my mystic moment, it was just a humorous moment that my husband Wayne told me he has discovered that he is related to Meghan Markle.
All right. We should all be wearing big hats.
Because her mother was a Raglan.
Really?
Really.
Awesome.
Well, that's totally cool.
I'm not sure if that's truth or fiction, but he's
Doesn't
sticking
matter.
to it.
He needs to write that story. I know he does. He needs
We
to
can
write
make
that
it truth.
story.
Either way.
Yeah.
That make it so. Yes.
Have you ever noticed that all Mystic Margie's moments have her husband in it?
Well, he's very mystical. I mean, Wayne's amazing.
Well, sometimes
is.
it's that
Wayne's
she
the
bought a
man.
new refrigerator or a mattress. So not all of them, but most of them.
We should have Wayne on the podcast. It'll sound like this. Well, I was walking,
And Wayne walks
After
about
midnight.
that fast.
and someone called the ambulance.
I know Waynesville, he walks every day, and he said, "Why do people keep pulling over and asking me if I need a ride?"
Wayne,
Poor Wayne.
we love him.
We do love Wayne. My mystic moment was that I was cleaning out some stuff. The Mystic Queen will be proud of me. And just had a thought I have so many little bags and just totes and stuff. So I thought I was going to donate some to the Goodwill. And I wisely went through it and found my favorite earrings at the bottom of them. I don't know how they crawled in there, but during COVID, I didn't wear earrings often because you had the mask, and so earrings were difficult to put in with the mask. And
The ones you have on look like some I lost at your house.
no, they're not.
Yeah.
No, I'm positive. But I found these, and they were, like I said, they are my favorite. Somebody special bought them for me, and I was just tickled to find them. Ta-da!
Well, this has just been a great, great podcast, and we're so happy to have had one of our fans here. Now, why are you our fan before we close?
I met you guys at Jimmy's house.
Yep.
It was like right
That's
at the
Jimmy
same,
Johnson.
at the same time that my first book was finished, but had not actually been made public yet. And so it was just down the street from my place. So I became a fan from that. I got to hear all your stories from early on, and became a groupie from there.
Good. We
So
like
sweet.
groupies.
We love
Unlike
you,
Jimmy
Dean.
Johnson, who ran as fast
And
as he
Dean-
could after publishing our book and never spoke to any of us
No,
again.
that is not true. That is not true.
Well, thanks for sticking it
I
out,
was going to
Dean.
say, really, Jimmy is a bit of a curmudgeon, but tell.
But he's a wonderful curmudgeon.
He is a
and
wonderful
a creative
curmudgeon. But
He
he
is.
just can't tell us all apart.
He is.
Tell us what you're doing right now, too, Dean.
Let's see. I've got another nonfiction humor collection that's out. It's called Minor Indiscretions and Other Family Misadventures.
Oh, nice.
And I've got,
Dedicate that one to the Mystics.
yeah, and I've got a children's book. I won't disclose the title because that would give too much of the story away, but it's already done and ready to go. And a second children's book called the Metro Gnomes still needs to be illustrated. And
Who's going to illustrate it?
I don't know yet. If I can get Patricia off the dime, she's got a lot of other projects, and she does a lot of visual arts, and she's good at it.
Oh.
So that's my sweetheart.
That's PJ.
Yep, PJ. Got a poetry collection called the Assless Chapbook.
Nice. You could just sit around and write names for books.
Our prolific.
Now, if people want to find more about you, should they look for Dean Bonner or Clarence Dean Bonner?
Or where are you on the media?
It's usually under CD and then parentheses Dean. I don't use Clarence that much because
Are you on Instagram?
I'm on there, but I don't rarely use that. I have my own website, cdbonner.net.
Ah,
More of a
thank
blog, really. But and then of course, I'm on Goodreads and Amazon, all that stuff too.
Yeah. And do you have a Facebook page?
I do.
Okay.
That's under Clarence.
Clarence Bonner.
Just keep things
Just
confusing.
to be inconsistent, yes.
All right.
Well,
Well, I think we have reached our time limit. And,
have.
And amazingly, the restoring of the studio and the hammering and the sawing has not happened. So this is good. And I want to remind you, girls, to be the flame.
Not the moth.